legislation today that has been introduced by me and Senator Blumenthal. It's an issue that Senator Blumenthal brought to my attention, and today we have introduced the Toxic Exposure Research Act of 2014. We're fortunate to live in a nation where men and women volunteer their services to sacrifice and support us to have the strongest, freest, greatest nation in the world. When service members raise their right hand and take the oath of enlistment or commissioning, they commit their lives to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and to protect the freedoms we hold dearly. Standing by their side through combat tours and multiple duty stations around the world is their family. And we should and we must acknowledge that their family members are being called to sacrifice for their nation as well. The Toxic Exposure Research Act is about addressing the wounds of war that might impact a service member's family, wounds that may not be evident for decades later when it's passed on to the next person of their family in the next generation. This legislation would provide for the research on health conditions of descendants of veterans who were exposed to toxins during their service to our nation, such as Agent Orange in Vietnam, Gulf War neurotoxins, burn pits in Iraq, or other chemicals from recent conflicts overseas. I'm not a veteran, but my life has been shaped by the fact that the Vietnam War took place during my high school years. Many of the conversations I had in high school were spent talking to those who were a few years older than me and who were volunteering or who were being drafted, and to those who returned home to my hometown after their service in Vietnam. During Vietnam, many of our veterans were exposed to Agent Orange, and years later, many veterans and their families are still struggling with the side effects of that exposure. Agent Orange specifically has been shown to cause birth defects in children of military members who came in contact with the toxin during the Vietnam War. And there are other poisons from war since Vietnam that have led to life-altering health problems and painful tragedies among veterans and their families. A story of Herb Worthington and his daughter Karen. Mr. Worthington was drafted to serve in Vietnam and was exposed to Agent Orange. Years after his service came to an end, he suffered from many conditions as a proven result of his exposure to Agent Orange. His daughter has battled MS for more than 19 years and has been treated for other conditions like melanoma and an extremely painful nerve condition. Her life has been handicapped by health problems and various kinds of illnesses, which must be studied in connection with their exposure of her father and what he experienced with Agent Orange. Stories like Mr. Worthington and his daughter Karen have been shared all across the country in town hall meetings. I've heard them in stories at home in Kansas, and they have been collected by the Vietnam Veterans of America. This is an issue that is important to all veterans. It's important to all Americans that we live up to our commitment to those who served, and it's time we take necessary steps to help and protect their families now and for generations to come. Many people we will never know may be affected by the consequences of their father, mother, grandfather, or grandmother's service to their country. The clear evidence of unsettling conditions and those personal stories warrant the need to collect data, to research and study the consequences of these toxins. I'd invite my colleagues to learn more about these conditions and the impact they're having on family members of veterans by checking out a social media page, Faces of Agent Orange, through the Vietnam Veterans Association, the VVA. The fact is, many of the symptoms from toxic exposure are misdiagnosed in descendants of veterans because of lack of understanding and lack of scientific proof. I'd ask my colleagues to join us in giving the authority to the secretary, the new secretary that we confirmed earlier this week, a tool that he needs so that he can designate a VA medical center as a national center for research on the diagnosis and treatment of health conditions of descendants of individuals, our soldiers, exposed to toxic substances during their service to our country, during their time as a military member. This legislation would establish an advisory board of scientists and experts to advise the National Center and the VA Secretary with determining the health conditions studied and those that are a result of toxic exposure. The Department of Defense has a role to play here in this research, sharing records and incidents of military members who were exposed to these substances to enhance the studies and the outcomes conducted by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Ultimately, our hope is that this medical research will determine those conditions that are the result of debilitating toxins and lead to appropriate support and benefits, cures and treatments for family members. Military families support our nations in their love and commitment to those who served in the armed forces, and they should not inherit the painful residual wounds of war that put their lives at risk long after the military operation is over. Toxic exposure research is a necessary step toward making certain our military men and women and their descendants will be properly cared for. It's also a step toward making certain that those toxins are not used in a way that causes this to be repeated once again in any future war. We must keep our promises to our veterans and to their families who have made the greatest sacrifice for the sake of our country, its security, our freedom, and our country's future.